Someone recently asked me this question, and it captures a challenge many people never find the right answer for. But Kat, how do you manage to fall back asleep? They assumed there was a single trick, some breathing pattern, a magic tea, a special routine. They'd already tried the usual fixes: blackout curtains, no screens at night, melatonin, caffeine detox, even prescription sleep aids. Nothing worked. Why falling back asleep is less about technique and more about your baseline. Most people think of falling back asleep as something you do. In reality, the deciding factor is whether your body can shift gears into a low arousal, sleep-permissive state on its own. That capacity isn't built in the moment. It's shaped by what your system has been exposed to over the previous hours, and in some cases, days. 1. Reframing the question. If you're waking in the night and can't fall back asleep, the important question isn't, "What should I try right now?" It's, "Has my nervous system been set up to re-enter recovery states without conscious effort?" Why this reframe changes everything. Most people approach middle-of-night waking as an acute problem requiring an immediate solution. This creates a fundamental mismatch between the timeline of the problem, seconds to minutes, and the timeline of the actual solution, hours to days of nervous system preparation. Sleep reinitiation is a neurobiological capacity, not a skill you can deploy on demand. When it happens automatically, it's because your brainstem's sleep-wake switching circuits can override cortical arousal without conscious intervention. When you ask, "What should I try right now?" you're essentially asking your conscious mind to solve a problem that can only be resolved by unconscious, automatic processes. This is about sleep capacity, not sleep technique. 2. The baseline factor. Your parasympathetic state, the body's built-in rest mode, is what allows you to downshift naturally after a middle-of-night wake-up. But parasympathetic capacity isn't just about relaxation. It's specifically about your autonomic nervous system's ability to rapidly shift from sympathetic activation back to vagal dominance under the pressure of sleep debt and circadian vulnerability. Research shows that higher heart rate variability, HRV, a marker of stronger parasympathetic, vagal, tone, is associated with smoother sleep stage transitions and better overall sleep quality. Low HRV before sleep predicts more fragmented and less restorative sleep. When this baseline parasympathetic tone is strong, waking briefly at night is followed by an almost automatic return to sleep. When it's compromised, you can be exhausted and still stay awake because your brain remains too close to its alert threshold. 3. What shapes this capacity over time? Autonomic flexibility during waking hours. Your nervous system's switching capacity gets stronger with specific types of controlled stress recovery cycles during the day. Brief, intense activation followed by complete recovery periods builds the neural pathways needed for rapid state transitions at night. Conversely, chronic low-grade activation without recovery periods, prolonged mental work, background stress, or stimulation without downtime, weakens your system's ability to access deeper parasympathetic states when needed. Inflammatory interference patterns. Even subclinical inflammation from poor recovery, chronic stress, or metabolic dysfunction can elevate cytokine levels enough to interfere with the delicate neurotransmitter balance required for smooth sleep reinitiation. Studies show that individuals with elevated inflammatory markers have significantly longer wake episodes during the night, regardless of their sleep hygiene practices. Recovery signal processing. Unresolved mental activation, late-night stimulation, or circadian misalignment keep neural circuits active past the point they should naturally quiet, interfering with your brain's ability to process, return to sleep cues during vulnerable transition periods. These aren't just habits. They're inputs that either strengthen or weaken the ease of returning to deeper stages once you're awake. 4. The counterintuitive revelation. Why nighttime efforts are biochemically counterproductive. When you wake in the middle of the night, you're not simply out of sleep. You've broken out of a finely tuned biological sequence called sleep architecture, and that's why standard interventions often don't work. One of the reasons is this. Effort adds noise to the system. Breathing drills or relaxation techniques can work if you're already near the reentry threshold, but if baseline arousal is too high, these can paradoxically keep prefrontal circuits engaged. The biological mechanisms behind this paradox are more complex than most people realize. Adenosine receptor sensitivity creates a neurochemical catch. 22-adenosine promotes sleep by binding to A1 and A2A receptors in the basal forebrain and hypothalamus, inhibiting wake-promoting neurons. But receptor sensitivity varies dramatically based on your recent sleep history and metabolic state. When your adenosine system is already compromised from chronic sleep restriction, caffeine interference, or inflammatory cytokines, these pathways may be more easily influenced by competing arousal signals. Conscious effort activates glutamate and dopamine pathways that can counteract adenosine's sleep-promoting effects. The result is that mental effort doesn't just fail to promote sleep, it may further bias the system toward wakefulness. This could help explain why people with chronic insomnia often report feeling more awake the harder they try, even when objectively exhausted. Prostaglandin cascades turn mental effort into inflammatory wake signals. Stress or sustained cognitive load can influence inflammatory signaling through the cyclooxygenase (COX) pathway, affecting the balance of prostaglandin E2, PGE2, and prostaglandin D2, PGE2, production in the brain. Under normal conditions, PGD2 promotes sleep by acting on the ventrolateral preoptic area, VLPO, your brain's primary sleep switch. But in a compromised state, an increased PGE2 to PGD2 ratio can shift the system toward wakefulness. Microglial activation creates neuroinflammatory sleep resistance. The emotional frustration and cognitive load of working at sleep can activate microglia, the brain's immune cells, specifically in the hypothalamus and basal forebrain where sleep circuits are located. Activated microglia release pro-inflammatory cytokines including interleukin-1 beta, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and interleukin-6. This creates a state of neuroinflammatory insomnia, where your sleep centers are actively suppressed by immune activation. The effect can persist for hours after the initial stress, explaining why a brief period of sleep effort may affect the entire night. Research shows that people with chronic insomnia have elevated microglia activation markers in sleep regulatory brain regions, suggesting this mechanism becomes self-perpetuating with repeated sleep effort. Thermoregulatory disruption shifts your circadian window. Your natural circadian rhythm includes a precisely timed drop in core body temperature, the circadian temperature minimum, that occurs around 4 to 6 a.m. and facilitates sleep reinitiation during this period. This temperature drop is mediated by peripheral vasodilation, particularly in the hands and feet, which allows heat dissipation from the core. The process is parasympathetically driven and can be disrupted by sympathetic activation. Sustained mental effort can maintain mild sympathetic activation, which may reduce the vasodilation needed for core temperature drop, making it harder to re-enter sleep during this window. The neurochemical perfect storm. These mechanisms don't operate in isolation. They interact, often amplifying one another, to create what can feel like a self-reinforcing alert state. It begins with mental effort. That cognitive strain increases glutamate release, the brain's main excitatory signal. Excess glutamate then activates microglia, the immune cells of the brain. Those microglia release cytokines, which set off inflammatory messengers and disturb prostaglandin balance. That imbalance weakens adenosine's ability to promote sleep pressure. With adenosine less effective, the sympathetic system stays switched on. Body temperature regulation falters. And instead of drifting into deep rest, wakefulness sustains itself. The result? You're working at sleep while simultaneously triggering multiple biological systems that maintain wakefulness. This explains why the same breathing technique that helps us fall asleep at bedtime can keep us awake at 3 a.m. The underlying biological context has changed, and conscious effort now becomes neurochemically counterproductive. This is why building reinitiation capacity during the day, rather than deploying techniques at night, becomes the foundational and viable long-term solution. The bottom line: by the time you're trying something at 3 a.m., your nervous system flexibility, transition vulnerability, and physiological baseline have already determined the outcome. Without addressing those inputs ahead of time, very little in-the-moment tactic can reliably restore the night's natural progression. 5. How to build sleep reinitiation capacity during the day, not at 3 a.m. Once I understood this, everything changed about how I approached middle-of-night waking. Instead of focusing on what to do when I woke up, I started focusing on what would make falling back asleep automatic. The ability to fall back asleep is built during the day, not earned at night. This meant shifting from symptom management to sleep capacity building. Rather than tracking just sleep duration, I started tracking how long it took me to re-enter deeper stages after a wake-up. If that time consistently stayed long, it told me my system's baseline wasn't set right. 3 core capacities that make sleep reinitiation automatic instead of another sleep hygiene checklist. Here are a few of the core capacities that help with easier sleep reinitiation. Autonomic flexibility training. Use controlled stress recovery cycles during the day to strengthen your nervous system's switching ability. This might include breath work with specific ratios, cold-heat contrast therapy, or high-intensity exercise followed by complete rest periods. Everything timed properly. These weren't just recovery tools, they were training my brain's capacity to rapidly shift states under pressure. Recovery signal optimization. Address inflammatory inputs, metabolic stability, and circadian alignment so your brain can clearly process return to sleep signals. This can include adjusting factors like evening meal timing, light exposure patterns, or underlying inflammation. Sleep architecture protection. Build consistent patterns that support natural sleep stage progression, so disruptions become brief rather than extended wake episodes. This involves understanding your individual circadian rhythm and adenosine patterns, then aligning daily activities to support rather than undermine these biological cycles. Model of how inflammatory sleep regulatory molecules can modulate neurotransmitters and physiological functions of the brain's vasculature to affect sleep and/or SWA. The key insight was recognizing that there are multiple biological levers beyond bedtime habits, but knowing which lever to adjust first and in what sequence makes all the difference. Falling back asleep isn't about a secret technique or just perfect environment. It's about whether your nervous system was prepared before you even got into bed. That preparation isn't left to chance. It's shaped by how you handle stress recovery, autonomic flexibility, and system readiness, so your brain knows exactly when to stay in restorative stages. Moving beyond sleep hygiene, once I stopped focusing only on sleep onset and started looking at what was disrupting continuity, my sleep became much more stable. The breakthrough came from shifting perspective entirely. Instead of asking, "How do I fall asleep better?" I started asking, "What's preventing my brain from staying in restorative stages?" The solution wasn't another bedtime routine, it was understanding how sleep pressure, neurotransmitter balance, and circadian timing interact during those critical hours after 3 a.m. This meant tracking not just when I went to bed, but how different daytime activities affected my parasympathetic-sympathetic tone. It meant considering whether late afternoon light exposure was shifting my melatonin curve. It meant recognizing that my 7 p.m. workout might be creating the wrong kind of arousal signal at the wrong time. Most importantly, it meant treating sleep as a biological system with measurable inputs and outputs, rather than something I could willpower my way through. When I started testing variables systematically, adjusting one factor at a time and measuring sleep continuity rather than just duration, the 3 a.m. wake-ups finally started to resolve. Many people tackle sleep disruption from the wrong angle and end up spending years on surface fixes. The framework I use is different. It helps you uncover what's broken, not just what's most obvious. If you've already tried magnesium, blue light blockers, and all the textbook sleep hygiene advice, Vault Sleep OS was built for you. It's a personalized systems-based roadmap that helps you identify your specific type of sleep disruption, how often it happens, and what biological and behavioral checkpoints apply to you. Then it walks you through each one, step by step, with tailored tools and workbooks to help you restore deep, consistent sleep. If you'd like to see how that process works, you can look inside Sleep OS at thelongevityvault.com. I've added the link in the show notes. And if this episode was helpful, follow or subscribe so you don't miss what's next.